before you swallow. I hit the deck, and woke up, and there was Barney and Spot.
Not all presidential maladies are caused by pre-existing or acquired conditions. Some are caused by pretzels. President George W. Bush recovered quickly after choking on that pretzel, momentarily losing consciousness in January 2002. Joining me now, Josh Barro, MSNBC contributor and national domestic correspondent for The Upshot, The New York Times. Sam Seder, MSNBC contributor and host of The Majority Report with Sam Seder, which I always get wrong and say The Minority Report. Healthiest president ever.
I mean, Donald Trump, obviously.
Well, obviously the healthiest ever.
Yeah.
But after him.
I mean, George W. Bush was actually quite healthy, aside from that pretzel incident. And I think part of what this goes to is I feel like people really overrate this issue. Like, Dwight Eisenhower had a bunch of very serious health troubles during his administration, spent a lot of time in the hospital, really couldn't discharge his duties, but people like the Eisenhower administration, reflect on it favorably. So long as you build a good administration around you, and so long as you're not on your deathbed, it's not clear to me how much this stuff matters. And on the other hand, we've had some presidents who have been in great health who have done quite a bad job of it. And in the Bush administration, I mean, we'd remember, like, Dick Cheney had some significant health problems that didn't seem to interfere with him having, really a lot of power to exercise in that administration.
Well, my favorite sort of historical trivia on this is the fact that JFK was just like, who, obviously it was like the image of him and vigor and youthful, football tossing, was like an absolute train wreck health-wise. Right. He had Addison's disease, suffered from terrible recurring back pain, ongoing troubles with allergies. On April 17, 1961, the day the Cuban exiles landed at Bay of Pigs, the president needed 600,000 units of penicillin. I don't even know what that could possibly mean. As his brother Robert Kennedy once quipped, "If a mosquito bites my brother, the mosquito dies."
Well, that's. I think there's a lot of sort of political things going on here. I mean, one is obviously Trump wants to sort of head off any attempt by Rubio to say that Rubio is full of vim and vigor. I mean,
right.
that's
a generational
you get this whole
thing,
generational thing that, and Trump has really made an issue of high energy and low energy. In fact, I mean, if you watch that sort of famous Trump focus group from the other night, they all have adopted that sort of parlance of like, I don't know about Rubio because he sort of doesn't have the same energy level that and I think that's part of it. And I also think part of it is Paul Tsongas, who's a senator, ran for the Democratic primary in '92. And
he won New Hampshire.
He won New Hampshire, but he also, there was some controversy as to whether or not he understated his health record, or whether or not cancer had returned or was in him at a certain date later.
Yeah.
Yes, and he ended up actually having diagnosed with the cancer had returned by the time that Clinton had basically gotten inaugurated. He was dead by the end of the first term. Wow. And there's a lot of speculation as to, if Tsongas had revealed, or there was a sense that the cancer was going to come back, would he have won New Hampshire? And if he hadn't won New Hampshire, would somebody else had? And then Clinton's whole comeback kid campaign. There's a lot of issues there.
Well, also, we're at this situation where, McCain would have been the oldest, I think, person elected, right? For the first time, right? Reagan's re-elect was older, but you have
big stakes in terms of his vice president.
Huge stakes, right? Let's remember. You also have Hillary Clinton, who is at the upper edge, right? And as people live longer, right, we're going to see people running into their late 60s, early 70s, and there's going to be concern about not just, physical health, but mental health. There's this huge fight happening over Ronald Reagan right now between Bill O'Reilly and George Will about whether the guy was essentially all there.
Yeah, and Donald Trump would be the oldest president first inaugurated if he were to win this election. I mean, not that he's going to, but if he did. But on the other hand,
that is actually an amazing point to linger on for a second, because I don't think anyone thinks of him in that term.
Right. Well, I mean, he does seem pretty energetic, honestly. And then the other thing is, we talked about this so much in the context of Bob Dole. And it was, is Bob Dole too old was a major theme in the 1996 election. But I mean, look at it now. Bob Dole, still around, still alive and kicking, still seems to be in good health. Like, this would be, if he had won, this would be 11 years after he would have finished his second term.
And look at the justices.
I would love to see the psychological, checkup from a lot of these candidates, frankly. I mean,
that
honestly,
would be great if that were the next step. If we basically said, look, we take physical and mental health seriously. We actually need a full psychological workup.
Right.
Be like, my client is obviously obviously a clinical narcissist.
That's the baseline. For
That
all
would
of
be
them,
the
right?
baseline for anyone.
I mean, I think it would be interesting to see how many sociopaths, are running for president at any given time.
You also get into these sort of, you get these sort of disclosure wars around it, right? Like you were talking about the Clinton medical record being the sort of object of conspiracy theory.
Yeah, well, so when Bob Dole was out there talking about what great health he was in, his campaign was also pushing, why can't we get more detail on Bill Clinton's medical records? He was releasing these summaries of physicals, well, not quite like the Trump thing, more like what Mitt Romney and other normal candidates put out that actually have data about what your cholesterol is and that sort of thing. But they're like, let's see the records, let's see what's in Bill Clinton's health history. And then there were all these theories about what might have happened to Bill Clinton over the course of his life that, because if you don't have those records, you can speculate all sorts of things.
That happened to Hillary Clinton, right? When Hillary Clinton had this sort of neurological issue, there was a million conspiracy theories.
To be honest, if we're really concerned about the health of these candidates, the idea that a doctor who's been working, the family has been working.
That's right. If that's transparent. Well, here's my proposal. I think Dr. Spichemin from 30 Rock should investigate every of the candidates, every one of them, and then write a report. Josh Barro and Sam Cedar, thank you both. Thank you. Back during the 2012 presidential campaign, Republican political consultant Karl Rove made a promise to wealthy Republican donors. Give my super PAC your millions, and I will use the money to get Mitt Romney elected president. As you probably know, that promise didn't pan out for Karl Rove, or for that matter, Mitt Romney. And it led to an infamous and humiliating election night meltdown by Rove live on Fox News, when he refused to accept Fox News' own call that President Obama had won the state of Ohio, and thus the presidency.
Do you believe that Ohio has been settled?
No, I don't. And look, if we are calling this on the basis of 74% of the vote being in, and when 77% is in, Secretary of State website, I got the director of the Ohio campaign for Romney on the other end of the line refreshing the page every few seconds. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we got to be careful about calling things when we have like 991 votes separating the two candidates and a quarter of the vote yet to count. Even if they have made it on the basis of select precincts, I'd be very cautious about intruding into this process.
Well, folks.
After that, you may remember Fox News host Megyn Kelly had to awkwardly walk down to the Fox News decision desk, where the network's number crunchers dismissed Rove's concerns and affirmed their call. After that, again, deeply humiliating 2012 loss, Republican megadonors made clear they were done with Rove. As Home Depot co-founder Kenneth Langone, major GOP donor, thundered to Gabe Sherman in New York Magazine, "I gave Rove $500,000. What did I get for it? Nothing." This time around, many of these megadonors are opting to maintain more control over their own money, on the theory they can spend it more effectively than political consultants like Rove. Sherman reports one of those donors, California winemaker John Jordan, now supports Republican candidates through his own super PAC, which applies the lessons Jordan has learned from winemaking. Yet, as the floundering candidacy of Jeb Bush has illustrated, it isn't all that easy to buy the election of a specific candidate of your liking, particularly these days. This chart from last week shows ad spending versus poll numbers. As you can see, Donald Trump is dominating despite spending almost nothing on ads, while Bush, down there in fifth place, has just 4% support despite $32.5 million in ad dollars to boost him. Now, as fun as it can be to laugh at the inability of billionaires to outright buy presidential elections, and believe me, it's very fun, it doesn't mean that money does not matter in politics. Far from it. Joining me now to explain, Fordham Law Professor Jennifer Teachout, CEO of the crowd-funded super PAC Mayday.us, which backs candidates who support campaign finance reform. So I've seen a lot of folks, it's sort of an article of faith among conservatives on the right that liberals make up this idea that money buys outcomes in politics, and a lot of them are pointing and saying, look at Jeb Bush. This is the perfect example that you liberals are wrong about money buying outcomes in politics.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at this as a machine as a whole. The whole primary and the whole election process is a machine. And the real question isn't how money is spent. And there's a lot of money that is very stupidly spent.
Yes.
And there's
a lot of money. Let's just be clear before we get to anything. Consultants make a lot of money basically hoodwinking rich people. Essentially.
Right. And there's a cottage industry right now, especially after Citizens United, in saying, look, I've got a special sauce in terms of a way to spend money. But the key is actually not how it's spent or on whom it is spent. And, you can't make Jeb Bush a great candidate.
Turns out.
Just by spending a lot of money on him. But the real corrupting influence is how the money is raised. And, this summer, the Koch brothers, who so far aren't spending on the presidential race, are still influencing it. Because they had a meeting in Southern California inviting Cruz, Rubio, all the candidates to let their views be known. And you'd have to be crazy to think that isn't influencing the campaign's internal policies.
Or even Sheldon Adelson, who has very well-known views on foreign policy, particularly Israel, where, there's all these articles written about, like, who's going to win the Sheldon Adelson primary. And like a plant growing towards the sunlight, right?
Yes.
the candidate, somehow the candidate's views start to sound a lot like Sheldon Adelson.
Yeah, I actually think that one of the better examples is something I think Paul Krugman pointed out a couple months ago, which is that all the Republican candidates have views on Social Security that do not make sense for their own base.
Right.
That if you look at where Republican primary voters are, they like Social Security, and the only plausible explanation for why this alleged variety of candidates is all running away from one of the most popular programs of the most likely voters is because the super PAC donors and their own donors.
And we should say that a notable exception to that is Donald Trump, who has been pretty defensive of Social Security benefits and who also isn't getting a lot of money from super PACs and big donors.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on Trump, but, there's other dynamics in this race, including the sort of rising fascism and demagoguery. And I actually do think these are interrelated. Because when a system is so deeply broken that you don't
and manifestly corrupt,
then very strange things happen that you can't anticipate.
Now, here, let me say this. The one argument I do think that the folks who are sort of on the right may have in their favor right now is, I do wonder if there's something going on, so we'll see, about the effectiveness of television in political campaigns. Because I think that, before 10 years ago, right, a political campaign consisted mostly of, at the national level, right, at big markets, was raise a lot of money, spend it all on ads, and you would see the poll numbers would move. You hammer some of the... It could be that we're entering an era in which the returns to television advertising are actually, like, really diminishing because people's attentions are so fractured.
I suspect that's true, that there's first of all, a lot of awareness when there's a television ad, and sometimes online ads, you don't necessarily feel the presence of the ad in the same way. I do think that there's kind of a obvious Moneyball moment that we're going to see where candidates move online pretty quickly all at once.
Yeah, and we can imagine that the influence there being in some ways more effective and also more pernicious, right? If you start getting people in your Facebook feed, I don't know, maybe they're like paid to post lots of stuff in your Facebook feed. And I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can imagine utilizing the sort of tools of social media to influence opinion that are sort of sneakier or maybe more effective.
And they're harder to have things like, and I hereby endorse this. This sort of Facebook moment or this set of associations that are being put together. So I think there's something we have to watch out for there. But I think that's right, that if you want to look for evidence of somewhat nonsensical ad spending, this election's a good example of that.
Ultimately, I think that one of the big lessons I think we can take away from this is that there's sometimes a presumption that rich people must know what they're talking about. Because they made a lot of money.
This is actually why there's lots of reasons to be in favor of self-government and a democracy, but one of the many ones is that wealthy, powerful people throughout world history have made idiotic decisions, and we should not trust them.
It's like the Jeb Bush campaign is like the analog to like the failing school system that the like tech philanthropist came swooped in to save, and then whose test scores went down. Zephyr Teachout, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This agreement represents the best chance we've had to save the one planet that we've got. We may not live to see the full realization of our achievement, but that's okay. What matters is that today we can be more confident that this planet is going to be in better shape for the next generation, and that's what I care about.
For the first time in history, 195 nations have come together unanimously, from the Marshall Islands to China, from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Saudi Arabia, from Madagascar to Brazil to the U.S., Russia, India, Turkmenistan, to approve the first global agreement to limit carbon emissions. Its aim is to stop the world from heating up beyond 2 degrees Celsius, or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the outer temperature limit scientists say we can't exceed if we are to avert catastrophic effects of climate change. There's even language in the agreement that pushes the world to be even more ambitious, to, quote, pursue efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, this has been hailed as a tremendous victory for the planet and for international diplomacy, because nothing like it has ever been done before, at least on paper. but just the fact that they got to a paper agreement was never foreordained. Negotiators blew past Friday's deadline before resolving their issues and signing the landmark climate agreement amid great fanfare and celebration on Saturday.
I see no objections. The Paris Agreement is adopted.
And a big part of this can be chalked up to the work of the United States, something President Obama pointed out in a tweet, quote, "This is huge. Almost every country in the world just signed on to the Paris Agreement on climate change, thanks to American leadership." The question now, is this agreement just paper, or will it lead to crucial steps needed to make it something truly historic? And joining me now, Todd Stern, Special Envoy for Climate Change, the U.S. State Department. He headed the U.S. negotiating team in Paris. And Mr. Stern, you have been at this for 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, for a very long time. And there's been lots of failures along the way, and lots of bilateral meetings, and lots of things that people thought were going to happen didn't come together. Why did this finally happen in Paris?
Well, thanks, Chris, for the question, and delighted to be here. Look, this is an agreement that has been a long time in the making, as you say. The real start of this whole process was Copenhagen in 2009. That didn't work, although something very important happened in that agreement. It started to get countries in a mode of taking action together. There were a number of these climate meetings happen every year. There were a number of meetings along the way. The mandate for this negotiation was put together in 2011, and so we've been in a 4-year negotiation, going bit by bit, year by year, to get to the place where we're at now. And as you said, this is an historic and enormously important agreement.
So there's been a range of reactions, and there's been a split among folks that sort of follow this, particularly sort of climate activists. A lot of them are praising it and saying it's great. A lot of them saying it does too little. A lot of them worried about essentially the enforceability. My understanding is that countries all sort of come up with their own pledges. Those pledges are public, and they can be held to by sort of peer pressure and shaming. But where is the accountability mechanism to make sure people hit their targets?
Well, look, there are two things about that. First of all, it is very rare in agreements like this to have punitive measures to punish countries for non-enforcement. That was never in the cards. You could never have gotten an agreement with 195 countries, all of whom have to agree. This is a consensus rule in order to get a deal done. So what we do have, though, are legally binding transparency regime, which has requirements for all countries, developed and developing, to put forward to do reporting on their inventories and the measures they take to realize their targets, and to have strict review of those efforts through expert teams, as well as peer review. So you've got a system for the first time that will apply to all countries and that will hold people to account. And that's important. So
everyone's the first ever essentially international reporting system for emissions and public targets, so that there's both the information about how much people are emitting and whether they are hitting or missing their targets.
No, that's absolutely right, and it's the first ever that applies to everybody. Remember, this agreement is basically the not Kyoto. Kyoto was an agreement in 1997 that just applied targets and transparency regime to developed countries. That's not going to work. That wasn't going to work in an agreement that was going to apply to everybody. So now we have, for the first time, as you say, an agreement that involves targets being put forward by everybody. 186 countries have already put forward their targets. Absolutely an extraordinary number that nobody would have predicted a year ago.
What are the consequences if the next American president decides to renounce this? Essentially, America were to elect someone who says either climate change is a hoax cooked up by international bureaucrats, or it'll hurt our competitiveness, and publicly renounces these targets.
Well, look, the reality is, Chris, that it is very rare to see that kind of thing happen. When a Democrat succeeds a Republican, or a Republican succeeds a Democrat, it is the long historic practice in the United States for new administrations to follow the international commitments that their predecessors have made. And it's an important thing, and across a whole range of national security and foreign policy areas. So this isn't just a matter of climate change or the environment, but this is a matter of the way business is generally done. And it's important here. You've got an agreement that is not only about a tremendously important issue, but also an agreement that has huge international support. So it would be a very, very consequential thing for a new president to walk away from what happened, and it would be very unexpected. At the same time, even if you don't have a new president, any country, it's always true in international relations that a country can pull out of an international agreement, but it is very rare, and I don't anticipate it happening here no matter who's the next president.
All right, Todd Stern, thank you very much.